Well, it's finally here, guys. The 20th anniversary of the God of War series. I'm writing this video well in advance of the anniversary, so I really don't know if the rumored God of War Greek Saga remaster was announced or not. If it wasn't, I assume a lot of you are pretty sad at being blue-balled by PlayStation once again. But I wanted to make this video with both outcomes in mind. I wanted to celebrate this huge milestone by looking at something many God of War fans often say: there isn't a single bad God of War game. This sentence is something that I can definitely relate to. Throughout these 20 years of God of War, my favorite game in the series has changed many times. For the longest time it was God of War 3, then it was God of War 2, then it was God of War 2018, only to then be replaced by God of War 2 again. And even now to this day, sometimes I wake up thinking that Ghost of Sparta really is my favorite game in the series, despite being made by a studio that wasn't Santa Monica, and for a console that wasn't as strong as a PlayStation 2 or PlayStation 3. If this proves anything, is that I am insane when it comes to answering the question of my favorite God of War game. But it also shows that truly there isn't a bad God of War game. And that's the feeling I wanted to capture with this video. This isn't really an in-depth retrospective. I'm not here to criticize what I think they should have done differently. I simply want to look at my favorite things from every single God of War game. So let's start with the very first game in the series by talking about the start itself.
The gods of Olympus have abandoned me.
This is still one of my favorite video game introductions ever created. David Jaffe wanted to change the rules on how to make an intro for a video game. Instead of bogging the player down with exposition and tutorials, he wanted them to jump right into the action. Unknown to the player, the game begins with the end of the story. A moment so emotional and deep that YouTube still is afraid to let me show you uncensored it. But needless to say, from the very second the game starts, you are captivated by the character of Kratos. You immediately want to know how this tragic person came to this end. But this is quickly forgotten the moment you take control of Kratos. Words can't adequately explain how I felt when I took control of Kratos the first time. By that time, I was still renting the PlayStation 2 with my friends, so we all had a certain amount of time to play the games we wanted to play. That way it would be fair to all of us. Now, most of my friends just wanted to play GTA San Andreas, but in all honesty, I hated that game. I know this is an unpopular opinion, but I do not like GTA San Andreas. I could give 3 shits about a game's openness if it controlled as stiff as GTA did. Meanwhile, playing God of War felt so intuitive. You could launch enemies into the air, jump and grab them with your blades from the ground, throw them at other enemies. God of War 1's combat was and still is one of the most fun aspects of the game. And DMC purists can cry about it all they want. The fact that there are more games that try to copy God of War instead of DMC should tell them that Santa Monica really created something special with God of War. If you play it on easy, it's going to be easy, but when you crank up the difficulty, it is quite satisfying to learn the flow of combat. And all of this was showcased with this intro. And my god, that Hydra battle was just amazing. In fact, God of War 1 only has 3 boss fights, but they are all amazing in their own right. The first 2 fights have a puzzle element that is meant to mirror the actions of Greek heroes like Odysseus. And then there's the final fight with Ares, a mythical tug of war that can either go for a long time or very quickly if you're good. Then comes the ending, circling fully back to the start, revealing that the story of the game wasn't just an interesting take on Greek mythology, but a Greek tragedy all along. God of War 1 is also old, and I know this doesn't sound like a compliment, but it really is. I love how you still have to find keys very Resident Evil style to open a secret room. I also love the level design of Pandora's Temple. It kinda resembles Dark Souls 1 looping level design, as every time you return you are amazed at seeing how this temple is so interconnected. And then you have to line them all the rings up in the temple and ascend to the higher section. Oh man, I just love this game. But then Cory Barlog was like, hold my Lemian wine because I'm about to drop God of War 2.
By defeating Ares, Kratos, the once mortal warrior, became the new god of war. However, Kratos soon found himself alone on Olympus, shunned by his fellow gods.
And it's like Cory knew me before he even met me. Because he took the coolest of the 7 wonders of the ancient world and asked, what if it could walk? God damn it. Something you're gonna see a lot in this video is me gushing over the quality of the introduction levels. This is something that began with God of War 1 and perfected with God of War 3. But God of War 2's intro is special in the sense that it's the only introduction level in the series that gives you a really good send-off. What I mean by this is that in other God of War games you can really feel the line that separates the intro from the rest of the game. But in God of War 2, this line is blurred, and this is because the big shocker moment doesn't happen right at the start of the game, but at the end of the intro. Kratos gets killed. In other games, after the intro is over, it takes a while for me to get excited about the game again, but God of War 2 is the only one that keeps me pumped, the one that keeps me want to keep going forward. Kratos dies, goes to the underworld, where the player realizes the narrator of the first game was a character all along, and then the game lets you crawl out of Hades itself. Which, by the way, Cesti noticed something really interesting here. Way in the background you can see one of the spinning towers you have to climb in God of War 1. When Ceci told me, I was mind blown with that small detail. But anyway, you crawl out of Hades and get on Pegasus and play a much more violent version of Star Fox.
Surprise attack coming from above!
Then you get sidetracked and you have to free Pegasus from Typhon. Have you noticed that the intro has ended a long time ago? No, because the game doesn't let you breathe in a good sense. There's never a dull moment in God of War 2. You keep finding yourself in new locations where you're like, are you telling me that right down this chasm is where the mighty Atlas lives? You quickly forget this question because you're going to be salivating over how beautiful this location is, something you've been doing a lot throughout your playthrough. This feeling of adventure is what God of War 2 does best. It feels like Cory Barlog read the Odyssey and asked himself, how do I capture this feeling of a mythical adventure in a game? And the answer was God of War 2. A game full of new and exciting locations, demigods competing with Kratos to gain an audience with the sisters, old foes brought back to life, poor old boat captains brought back to life.
No, not you again!
Like I said before, there's never a dull moment in God of War 2. Not even when the credits roll, because the story leaves you with one of the coolest, most goosebump-inducing cliffhangers in the history of video game storytelling.
Zeus, your son has returned! I bring the destruction of Olympus!
And Santa Monica knew what they were doing with this cliffhanger, because it took them 3 whole years to bring the series to a conclusion. So instead, they decided to flesh out the characters with some prequel games. Starting with God of War Chains of Olympus, which, according to its director, was originally going to be very different. I don't remember where he said this now, but when he said it, I got the feeling that the original Chains of Olympus would be more of a 2D side-scroller game. I took it that he didn't want this because the game wouldn't feel like a God of War game. But I have to disagree, because we have already a successful 2D God of War game. You thought I was gonna talk about Chains of Olympus? Nah man, I'm here to give some praise to the black sheep of the God of War series, God of War Betrayal. Look, I know this one is the hardest God of War game to give praise to, but I really think we shouldn't be so hard on it. The game is a mobile game, and not a modern mobile game. Back in my day, phones didn't have a touchscreen that could create buttons on the fly. We had to use the freaking dial buttons as controls. So naturally, the game feels a little bit janky. But despite its limitations, God of War Betrayal was received by mobile users. It even won 2 awards for Best Game of the Month and Best Platform Game. If God of War Betrayal doesn't convince you that there aren't any bad God of War games, I don't know which game in the series will, to be honest with you. And yeah, the story leaves much to be desired, but I also think it's not fair to compare with other stories from the series. The truth is that God of War Betrayal's story is unfinished. The story was created when Santa Monica had a completely different story for the Greek saga planned, one where Deimos would have been the villain. That's why he frames you very early in the game. This is actually a really interesting topic in the God of War series, a topic that you can learn more about by watching this video. But the point is that God of War Betrayal had and still has a lot of things working against it. And despite all that, it came out as one of the best mobile games of the generation. But now, let's go back to God of War Chains of Olympus for a bit. Because the director was right, he somehow managed to cram into the PSP a full-on God of War game, a feat that wasn't so easily achieved. But thanks to Ready at Dawn, PSP fans could enjoy yet another God of War game. One that surprisingly added a lot of humanity to the character of Kratos. That ending, oh man, every time I play this game or look up the cutscenes, I can't help but be hypnotized by this ending. This was one of the moments in the Greek saga that really showed that it was more than just a hack and slasher game.
I will serve them, and they will keep their promise to free me from my past!
I ask you, Spartan, what good is the promise of an Olympian?
It is all I have, Atlas!
But the game also did a pretty good job replicating what made God of War's combat shine. And one of the things that I was pleasantly surprised by was the side weapon. Before Chains of Olympus, I was never really a big fan of changing weapons mid-combat. I do now, I've learned, okay? But it was Chains of Olympus that first got me out of that shell. The gauntlet was just so much fun to play with. And the sound it made, oh man, that sound is so good. But now, let's move on to God of War 3, the game in the series that I consider to be the best for a very, very long time. And perhaps I still do, I haven't made my mind up yet. And do I really need to explain why I felt that way? First, I know graphics aren't the most important aspect of any game, but god damn it, Santa Monica made the best looking PlayStation 3 game. Yeah, even better than Uncharted 3. The attention to detail is also insane. One fact that I always love to bring up regarding God of War 3, it's the rats you see in Hades. If you manage to hit one of these rats, they will release a single red orb. I don't know who in the studio came up with this idea, but thank you for adding such a nerdy detail. As a fellow nerd, I really appreciate it. But God of War 3 doesn't just have window dressing, the game is hack and slasher royalty. This is the game where Santa Monica, in my opinion, perfected their hack and slash combat. It was faster than the previous games, there were a total of 3 side weapons that could be stylishly changed on the fly, they added the Hyperion grapple for more offensive combat, the boots of Hermes allowed you to dash in the air. Look, all you have to do to fall in love with this game's combat is just play it. Now, can we also give a shout out to the bosses of God of War 3? This aspect of the game is probably what made me fall in love with this game in the first place. The story of God of War 3 details the fall of the Olympian pantheon, and Santa Monica captured this feeling in the epic fights against these gods. Hades, Hermes, Zeus, Poseidon. Oh my god, Poseidon is such a sexy boss, man. You thought I had a thing for moving statues? Moving statues have nothing against giant water horses. This whole intro level just kicks ass. But they didn't stop there, because they also made Kratos into a boss/level. Did you know that Santa Monica had a small team that worked on this level for months? Well, if you didn't, it's kinda obvious because the quality and attention to detail is just outstanding. Not just in how epic this fight is, that's a given, this is one of the most epic levels in video game history, but also in the small details that aren't obvious right away. Like the fact that you can find some locations from God of War 1 if you zoom in using photo mode. I love God of War 3 so much that right now I'm thinking that it might be better than God of War 2. But then I remember that there's another big heavy hitter from the Greek saga that I can't forget about.
Before there was a god. Before there was a warrior. The Oracle had foretold of the Marked One. Every past has its ghosts. Every end must first begin. God of War, Ghost of Sparta.
Man, I truly hate what PlayStation did to this game. I truly do. They decided to release a prequel story on a portable console only a few months after Santa Monica had released God of War 3. What did they think was going to happen to this game sales-wise? It absolutely tanked for God of War standards. They pretty much sent out this game to die. And why? Why would you do that to such an amazing game? I often say that God of War Ghosts of Sparta has my favorite story in the series. Maybe not the best, but it is definitely my favorite one. And this is because Cory Barlog was once again the writer of the game. And it's really interesting because with Ghosts of Sparta, you begin to see Cory change as a writer. Even though the game still had the classic epic scale and bombastic action-adventure of the first Greek games, it was also more grounded, similar to God of War 2018. For example, one of my favorite interactions in Ghosts of Sparta is with the guy Kratos accidentally frees. As you go through the prison, you learn that the reason he's constantly putting roadblocks is because he doesn't recognize Kratos as the true God of War. He is still a believer in Ares, and based on his appearance, you can tell that this guy wasn't a Spartan soldier. He was maybe a politician who didn't want to go with the new god of the state, which is why he finds himself in prison. I love this little detail because it shows Cory's approach to a more grounded storytelling style. It shows Sparta as being a real place with real people and real consequences. The role of this guy could have given to any random character, or not a character at all, just a guy, just a regular guy. But Cory went all in with the lore, man. There's also the inclusion of Midas, who at first it seems like he was just put in this game so Kratos could traverse a wall of lava safely. But I also think the reason Kratos shows so much brutality towards Midas is because he sees himself a little bit in him. He too was given great power by a god, and this power resulted in those close to him paying the price.
I didn't mean to. I thought... How could I know that she would... Oh, my daughter. My beautiful little girl.
The tone of this game is just perfect. The cutscenes are mesmerizing with how well they've been animated, and the voice acting goes unnecessarily hard with some very unimportant characters.
A daughter, a message to the ghost of Sparta. The labor begins. Death awaits the ghost. He will never get the skull. The skull.
It really is a shame that not a lot of people have played this game. And I almost forgot to talk about this, but the gameplay is also vastly improved from Chains of Olympus. The gauntlet was great, but it has nothing against the Arms of Sparta, the best side weapon in the series. That is until another spear in the series completely dethrones it. So look, I could talk about Ghosts of Sparta all day, but I gotta move on. So let's now show some appreciation to the other black sheep of the God of War series, God of War Ascension. And look, I think in the past I have been too harsh in this game. It's true that it has some issues, but it's still a great game at the end of the day. And I've changed my mind on a couple of things that I initially complained about, like the lack of weapons. It's true that the game doesn't have any other weapons aside from the blades, but it does give different elemental powers that reward you for changing them when playing in harder difficulties. The game also gives you plenty of disposable weapons, my favorite being the shield. I've also changed my mind on the rage meter, believe it or not. What I first thought to be an annoying design choice, I now see that it's meant to reward those who play well. There were also some new additions to the enemy roster that were welcome, like the Agile Impusas, the Satyr captains that can command smaller enemies, and my personal favorite, the Elephant Dude. I love this dude for two reasons. Mechanically speaking, he was really unique because he had a second stage where he would break his weapon and go completely berserk. This forces the player to change the strategy on how to defeat him, something that the Cyclops don't have. But I also love him because he looks really cool. Overall, I just love the art direction of God of War Ascension. Both enemies and location look absolutely breathtaking. I think they took God of War 3's criticism of looking too dark and went the completely opposite direction. And the result is a very vibrant mythological world. I know it's not my favorite game in the series, but I would love to see a remaster of it just for the art direction alone. And of course, we have to talk about the multiplayer mode. Guys, back in 2013, we didn't know how good we had it with this multiplayer. These days, all you get is stupid live service games with an endless flow of microtransactions meant to suck you dry, and not the good kind of sucking. Meanwhile, God of War Ascension's multiplayer was truly created with God of War fans in mind. From the very start, where you would be asked to make an allegiance to the god of your choice. From then on, you would gain access to the armory, where you could design the Greek hero of your dreams. And then you could send them out to battle with other God of War fans with a combat system that was really faithful to the single player mode. The multiplayer was truly underrated, but the good news is that you can still play this mode if you have PlayStation Plus. It might be difficult to get someone to play with, but if enough people log in, we could see a revival of sorts. But now, it's time to leave the Greek saga behind and talk about the game that took the world by storm, God of War 2018.
I am hungry. Feed us.
Man, I owe so much this game. The reason you're watching this video, or the reason I have a channel at all, is because of God of War 2018. And this is once again thanks to Cory Barlog's talent as a writer. With God of War 2018, he brought more focus to what had made Ghost of Sparta so good. That groundedness in a mythological world. Magni and Modi, who are constantly looking for their dad's approval. Brock and Sindri's strained relationship. Baldur's relatable pain. And Kratos and Atreus, the thing that holds all of these parts together. The story itself is not complicated, but it's the journey that these two characters go on that's memorable, making for some of the most heartfelt moments in the series. By now you're probably sick of hearing me talk about the Blades of Chaos moment, because it truly is the best moment slash cutscene in the series. But I also want to give credit to the final fight with Baldur, where every single story thread comes together to form an epic conclusion. Look, I have some trouble replaying God of War 2018 because the story is designed as a slow burn, but the moment I get to the end, I just lock in. It's just filled with so much tension. Not to mention that it also brought back some of the series' spectacle with Thamur attacking in the background. It's the part of the game where the no-cut camera shines the most. And even after this epic conclusion, there's still more to do. Like the Valkyries. Man, I love fighting these things. They are some of the most challenging fights in the series, but they also maintain that focus on the story. One that serves as a hint for what Freya might be capable of doing to Kratos in the following story. And even Niflheim, a part that's hated by most, I kinda liked. It's a free roguelike for you to test your mettle after the post-game. Well, what else do you want? And I haven't even talked about the combat. Sure, there are things I would like to see change in the future, but the formula is still solid. The fact that the game kept me entertained with the Leviathan axe long before the blades were introduced should tell you how much fun the combat can be. Overall, God of War 2018 remains the standard for the Norse saga. But even though the following game couldn't live up fully to what God of War 2018 started, even I have to admit that it's still a really good game. For God of War Ragnarok, what mattered the most in my opinion was handling the goodbye between Kratos and Atreus. Of course, I would have loved it if there was one more Norse game in between God of War 2018 and Ragnarok. But despite this little hurdle, the story still managed to get a few tears out of me. Probably my second favorite moment in the Norse saga is found in God of War Ragnarok, believe it or not. That whole section where Kratos and Atreus have to stop Garm felt like a mini God of War 2018. It was the part where Kratos and Atreus were forced to grow together while dealing with a destabilizing mythological creature. Yeah, the story could have been better, but compared to all other stories in 2022, God of War Ragnarok still was ahead of the race. But in almost everything else, Ragnarok managed to go bigger than God of War 2018. The combat was faster. There were a ton of side missions that honestly didn't even feel like side missions. There was even a whole secret session that felt like a mini game in itself. One that could be completed with either Freya or Atreus as your companion. This was impressive because they each had their own dialogue at times, something that must have been crazy hard to coordinate. God of War Ragnarok also had the best side weapon in the series. I know a lot of you wanted Mjolnir, but I'm pretty happy with the Draupnir spear. That siphon and the popping spear ability, I love that. That is amazing. Ragnarok also greatly improved the enemy variety. There were dragons, stalkers, Drekkies. Jesus, do I love the Drekkies in Ragnarok. The soundtrack also kicked ass, and that means a lot in a series that has always been known for having a great soundtrack. But in Ragnarok, it felt like a nice balance between the more emotional tracks of 2018 and the bombastic epic themes of the Greek games. And to top it all off, God of War Ragnarok is the only game in the series to have a story DLC. And a good one at that. A full-on roguelike that brings on an epic conclusion to the Norse saga, and some even say Kratos. I'm not ready to say that last part because I still want more Kratos games. But I could understand why some fans would be happy if this is the last time they saw Kratos. The way they handled the story was simply beautiful. Overall, yeah, I have some issues with Ragnarok, okay? But I respect and even understand if this is your favorite game in the series. I don't know what the future holds for the series as a whole, but I'm sure of this much. There isn't a single bad God of War game, and hopefully there will never be. Happy 20th anniversary, everybody.